Come without money, come without price. Jesus hath made the great sacrifice. Gladly he suffered at Calvary. He the great cause, salvation is free. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come unto me. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come. Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. He in grace and truth doth abound. Call upon him while he is near. Thy soul shall live if him thou dost fear. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come unto me. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come. Why do you tarry out in the cold? Come when he calls, now enter his fold. He, the good shepherd, will welcome you in. Oh, how he longs to save you from sin. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come unto me. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come. Why do you wait? Why linger so long? Prepare to enjoy that heavenly throne. Soon will the gate of mercy be closed. Sad it will be to find no repose. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come unto me. Here's his call so tenderly. Incline thine ear and come.
What does a Christian look like? Now, I want you to think about that and just kind of picture a Christian in your mind. Now, I'll tell you, as I was searching for, the internet for different pictures about what a Christian looks like, or what does a follower of Jesus look like, I kind of played around with searching in those things for images. And so many times, I don't know exactly what this states, but I'm going to share it with you. So many times, the pictures that I found were empty church buildings. Now, I don't know what we as Christians have done to give people the idea that what it means to be a Christian is, an empty church building. But maybe there's a lesson in that kind of picture and how hard it was actually to find groups of actual Christians that were gathering together. Anyways, going back to this question, what does a Christian look like? Well, I want us to look at the story of Matthew. Now, Matthew is one of the writers of the Gospels. In fact, whenever you open up the pages to the first book that you get into the New Testament, it is the Matthew's Gospel. And in that book, Matthew tells his own sort of story. But I will tell you, it's not as much details as what you might think. But I want us to learn something about what a Christian looks like from this story and even from this whole chapter in Matthew chapter 9. Let's turn there together. Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13. I'll read it first and then we'll kind of work our way through the text together. In Matthew chapter 9, beginning in verse 9, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Okay, so let's take a look at this chapter together. Which, by the way, as you look at verse 12, he's talking about he's not for the healthy. It's not for a healthy. It's who need the doctor. It's the sick. He's talking about these healthy being sick, and I'm sorry. He's talking about those who are sick becoming healthy and all. That is very fitting for this chapter. I know that we kind of didn't really get into what Matthew is going to continue to look at, but the rest of this chapter are so many occasions whenever someone who is in need of a doctor, who is very sick for whatever reason, they become healthy. They are healed. So isn't it interesting that Matthew's story that he tells of himself, it's found within a chapter full of healings? I don't think that's on accident. Now, also, I don't think that that means that, well, Matthew is sick and, that's why he followed Jesus. No, 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 no. Let's take a step back. Let's realize Matthew understood that he was sick with a different type of illness. It wasn't a physical illness, it was the spiritual illness that has infected all humans, and that is sin. Matthew, here as we see him in verse 9, he is sitting at the tax collector's booth. Now, I don't know if maybe this is even Matthew himself, who he doesn't even want to say that he is a tax collector, but I mean, he's a tax collector, okay? But we see that he is sitting there at the tax collector's booth. It's not exactly the friendliest of places. People, they would try to avoid it if they could, but inevitably, yes, they've got to go there, they've got to pay taxes, and they didn't like it just like people don't like taxes today. But Matthew is sitting there, and his job is to collect taxes. Many Jewish people would not have liked this because Matthew got his income by what they would have viewed as the enemy. It's the Roman government that Matthew works for. And he is sitting there and he is collecting taxes from his own people. But while he's sitting there, one day that he is sitting there, Jesus came up to him. And as far as Matthew tells it, Jesus just said, "Follow me." That's what he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now, going in line, just a little bit of interesting things about this term about that he got up. This is the same type of language as what we're going to see in just a little bit, and that is kind of rising up, this language of resurrection, kind of coming into this newness. And I know that at this point in the story, you're like, why are you even pointing that out? I'm pointing that out because it's going to show up in a very kind of physical way later on in this chapter, because there is going to be somebody who is dead, but they are going to get up. They're going to rise up and live. So it's not an accident that Matthew uses this language, that he talks about it, his own coming to Christ and following Jesus in the same context of so many other people who are getting healed. Matthew was receiving healing. He was receiving salvation of a spiritual kind. Matthew was sitting at the tax collector's booth. He gets up and he follows Jesus. Now, we don't know. There's a whole lot of questions you could ask, well, is this the first time that Jesus encountered Matthew, or, have they been talking? Were they friends? What is going on? We simply don't have any of those details right here in this chapter. I know that probably bugs you just like it bugs me. This is the story that we have. He's telling us a condensed version, but he's telling us to move on because there's more to this story. Because right after Matthew starts following Jesus right here from verse 9, we see that in verse 10, where we are at is, now we're at Matthew's house. But who is at his house? Well, it's his friends. It's the people that he's used to being around. And it says that many tax collectors and sinners, this is a phrase, tax collectors and sinners. I don't know what would be the equivalent, and honestly, I'm not even going to try to name what the equivalent would be for our modern days. But the idea of who is connected with sinners, they just had this phrase, tax collectors and sinners. And I'm sorry if you are a modern day tax collector. This is just a phrase that has come down to us from the Bible, and they were connected with sinners. I don't know what other group or whatever, kind of category of people, of workers, that, occupation. I don't know what the modern day equivalent would be that would be connected with sinners. But here it's tax collectors, and Matthew is one of those. But something's happened. He has got up. He has woken up. He's risen up, and now he follows Jesus. So what does he do? Well, so many of these apostles that we read about, the first thing that they do is they go get other people. Well, what's happening here? verse 10, at Matthew's house, there's these tax collectors, there's these sinners who are there. But notice verse 11. Who else is there? Well, we definitely see, I kind of already, I guess, sort of skipped over some of them. We see that Jesus is there, and also the disciples of Jesus are there. Verse 10. Now, verse 11. Who else is there? Who else is present, and who else is kind of focused on in this chapter? Verse 11, it says, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why? They want to know why. Why would Jesus be spending, why is this teacher, this rabbi, why is he eating with tax collectors and sinners? Good people don't do that, right? Or do they? These Pharisees, they want to know. Now, I know that sometimes Pharisees, they get a bad, idea from us because, we see that they're the ones that kind of led to Jesus being crucified later. You fast forward and yes, okay, sometimes we as Christians, we might think of Pharisees as not a good people. But Pharisees are a good group of people. They are the ones who are having this strict sense of following the law. So these Pharisees, they see it, they're confused. They say, why does your teacher, this good teacher, if he is good, why is he eating with tax collectors? Why is he eating with sinners? But then Jesus responds in verse 12 and 13. He tells them it's not the healthy who need the doctor, it's the ones who are sick. The ones who are sick are these tax collectors. They're these sinners. There's these people who need to have the same type of experience that Matthew has already had. They need to get up. They need to rise up. They need to follow Jesus. And that is true today as well. But then Jesus assigned some homework. And I'm going to also kind of assign you this homework too. I'm not going to give you the answers. I want you to go search it out. Verse 13, it says that Jesus told those Pharisees, the ones who knew the law, he says, but go and learn what this means. And he's quoting, he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. He gives them the homework. What does it mean? Go, learn what it means whenever God says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. So the homework I would assign you is the same homework that Jesus assigned them. Go look that up. Go and learn what it means. What did God mean whenever he said that he desired mercy, that he did not desire sacrifice? Because we clearly see in the Old Testament that he gave all type of descriptions about what types of sacrifices are to offer or to be offered and everything. But what does he mean whenever he says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice? That's a good homework assignment. But now back to this chapter of healing, because we haven't got to too much healing just yet, but we have seen Matthew. But keep reading, there's more. In Matthew chapter 9, now verses 18 through 26, we're going to kind of skip down a little bit of Jesus' teaching, and we're going to pick back up with some more individuals that we see in this chapter. Some more individuals who are hurting. Verse 18. While he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, my daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live. Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. Jesus turned and saw her. Take heart, daughter, he said. Your faith has healed you. And the woman was healed at that moment. When Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes, he said, go away. The girl is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread through all that region. Look at who are the ones who are followers of Christ. So already we've seen the phrase of those people who are followers of Christ, the ones who become Christians. We've seen that they are Matthew. They're the ones that are connected to the tax collectors and the sinners. And right here now we see in verse 18, there's a synagogue leader who has this wonderful faith in Jesus, that even though his daughter has died, he believes Jesus can do something about it. But before Jesus even completes this miracle, which this is kind of one of the few times, maybe even the only time, I don't know of another time offhand, But this is the only kind of miracle within a miracle that I really know of that happens like this, because before he even performs the first miracle, another miracle happens, because while he is going to the house of the synagogue leader, what happens right here is that there's a woman who has been hurting. So who do we see coming to Jesus? We see tax collectors, we see sinners, we see a synagogue leader, and now we see this woman who has been hurting for years. But notice her faith, and Jesus heals her, and he tells her that it was because of her faith that she was healed. What does a Christian look like? Sometimes a Christian looks like a tax collector. Sometimes a follower of Christ might look like a sinner. Sometimes they might look like a synagogue leader who has deep faith in Jesus. And sometimes they might look like a woman who has just been going through a rough time for years. A follower of Christ can look so many different ways, because everyone needs Christ. And Christ came for all, to give all salvation, to all who would believe, to all who would have this faith. And we see here that, yes, he does, after he heals the woman who had been hurting for 12 years, he does go to the little girl, the daughter of the synagogue leader, and he takes her by the hand, and she got up. Same type of language with Matthew, right? He got up and he followed Jesus. Well, this girl, she got up. She was raised up from the dead, and she followed Jesus. And yeah, you better believe verse 26. I would say this is an understatement of the day. News of this spread through all that region. Do you think news of something like this would spread if it were to happen today? Yeah. It spread like wildfire during this day because it was a big deal. People don't just rise up from the dead. No. Yet, when you hang around Jesus, you see things like that. At least so many of his apostles did. Matthew, I have no clue if he knew what he was getting into fully whenever he got up and followed Jesus. But he took that step of faith, and he followed Jesus, and he saw wonderful, wonderful things. There's still just a little bit more in this chapter for us to focus on, because now verses 27 through 34, and we're not even going to get to the end of this chapter, and we didn't start at the beginning. I know that we've kind of skipped around a little bit, but I've been trying to focus on these people, or these groups of people that we see. So what does a follower of Jesus look like? Sometimes they look like a tax collector or a sinner. Sometimes they look like a synagogue leader. Sometimes they look like a woman who is suffering. And sometimes they look like these men right here. Matthew 9:27 through 34. As Jesus went on from there, two blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, son of David." When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him and he asked them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their sight was restored. Jesus warned them sternly, "See that no one knows about this." But they went out and spread the news about him all over that region. While they were going out, a man who was demon possessed and could not talk was brought to Jesus. And when the demon was driven out, the man who had been mute spoke. The crowd was amazed and said, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." But the Pharisees said, "It is by the prince of demons that he drives out demons." So in this chapter, we see other groups of people who could be followers of Jesus. Yes, they might look like a tax collector or a sinner, a synagogue leader, or a woman who is suffering, but they could look like these two blind men, these men who are suffering, yet they have faith in Jesus. They know he is a son of David. They know that he is the descendant of David who is going to sit on the throne of David and rule and reign and conquer. That is exactly who Jesus is. And it was according to their faith that they were able to receive their sight. Their faith in God, their faith in Jesus. And we see in verse 32, sometimes a follower of Jesus might look like someone who was demon possessed. But people like this who come to Jesus with their problems, their spiritual problems, their physical problems, they're just problems, social problems, if you will. They come to Jesus, and when they step out on faith, they can get up just like Matthew, and follow Jesus. However, there have been another group that I've already kind of mentioned a little bit in this chapter, and it's these Pharisees. There's a group of Pharisees in verse 34 that says it's by the prince of demons that he drives out demons. They were attributing the work of the Holy Spirit that is being done through Jesus Christ to demons. Heed that warning. Jesus spoke, not necessarily right here, but Jesus spoke very much against this behavior that we see in verse 34. These Pharisees, they were refusing to see what was right in front of them. The power of the Holy Spirit working. They attributed it to something demonic. We can't be doing that. We can't be doing that at all. Now, any of these Pharisees, though, if they had chosen to have faith in Jesus, then they could also be among the list of people of who it looks like who would be a follower of Jesus, because we do know that some Pharisees, they did follow Jesus. So a follower of Christ, what does a Christian look like? A Christian can look like almost anybody who is hurting, who is just going through life. But a Christian looks different whenever they turn to Jesus. They get up. Their life has changed. They are raised up from the dead. Their problems are turned around in so many different ways that we see that. Sometimes even their physical ones, but most certainly all of our spiritual problems, when we give them to Jesus, he is able to deliver us. He's able to heal us wholeheartedly. We see this faith that it takes to be a follower of Jesus. I hope that we can make the choice in our days to, just like Matthew and just like these others who receive healing in this chapter, I hope that we can get up and that we can follow Jesus. Now, I don't know what that is going to look like in your life and what you're going to see in your life, but I do know that following Jesus, it's worth it. And the only way for you to truly know what all you will see is if you get up and follow him. So will you do that?
I run for the crown, I race for the prize, I press toward the upward call of God. I run for the crown, I race for the prize, I press toward the upward call of God. I fight with all my might to keep on living for the Christ. I know there is a glorious end in sight. The crown of life, the crown of victory I shall wear. So I sing the song of triumph till I'm there. I run for the crown, I race for the prize, I press toward the upward call of God. I run for the crown, I race for the prize, I press toward the upward call of God. I fight with all my might to keep on living for the Christ. I know there is a glorious end in sight. The crown of life, the crown of victory I shall wear. So I sing the song of triumph till I'm there. I run for the crown, I race for the prize, I press toward the upward call of God.